So to recap, we've looked at preparing for financial freedom, we've talked about creating a plan, we've talked about generating a profit, we've talked about generating a pension or an income, we've now then talked about progress, ensuring your financial planning progresses with you. The final element, possibly the most important, is the personal side of financial planning. There's so many more important things than just the money. And in the Dream Retirement, How to Secure Your Money and Retire Happy, I talk about quite a lot of things to do with you, how you should spend your time, how you should improve your well-being. And we've packaged all of those up into a solution that we call the Fulfilled Life Formula. And in the Wealth Workshop, because it's predominantly about the money, I'm not going to cover the vast majority of the content that's in the Fulfilled Life Formula. That's something we tend to share with our clients rather than just using it in these workshops. But there is one element of it that really does relate to your money. In fact, it's the crossover between your 6 human needs and your money. And it's how we create a legacy rather than just a will. Now, what do I mean by creating a legacy rather than just a will? Well, the problem is there's a lot of damage that can be done by just having a will. There's a lot of problems that can occur with your family's future finances if you just have a will. So let's look at what they are. The easiest way to describe this, by the way, is to use my own situation as an example. It's much easier talking about nasty things happening to me. So if Carol and I, by the way, Carol is my wife, and we have 2 children, Fiona and Bronwyn. As you may pick up from their names, I have married a Welsh girl. So if Carol and I had just a will, what you would expect to happen is you'd expect if something happens to me, then I'd leave everything to Carol, and then on Carol's death, she'd leave everything to Fiona and Bronwyn. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That's what you'd want to happen. The problem is that often doesn't end up being the case. So why is that? Well, firstly, let's say I die and Carol, being still nice and young, she decides to remarry. In fact, let's call him Juan, shall we? So if Carol remarries Juan and then dies, or remarries Juan and then divorces, potentially Fiona and Bronwyn miss out on half or even all of their inheritance because Juan walks off with it. Even if Juan never turns up, if Carol ends up in a care home, then potentially everything down to the last £23,000 in the estate has got to be spent before she gets any help from the state. And then finally, when she dies, everything is in her estate for inheritance tax purposes. So that means Fiona and Bronwyn are going to set light to, they're going to lose roughly 40% of most of that money before they get it. As and when it goes down to Fiona and Bronwyn, firstly, at the moment, they're quite young, so if we just had a will, the money would go into a bear trust, but it would be all theirs the day they turned age 18, which would probably lead to an amazing Freshers' Week, but not a very good life there afterwards. And in fact, we might have a couple of Paris Hiltons running around Rutland, who knows. So we have the problem of getting access to their money too early. Even when they get older and more responsible, there's still risk because they might meet the son-in-law from hell and marry him and divorce him and he walk off with half of the money. And then, of course, when they want to leave the money to their children, they've got to worry about inheritance tax all over again. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to set up a trust framework. So on my death, the first person to die, I'm going to leave certain assets to trust. That's typically going to be my pension, my life insurance, the shares in my business, and also the first $325,000 of my estate, because that's the bit that you can leave free of inheritance tax. Now that money is then made immediately available for Carol to take out of the trust. She can take the money out of the trust framework as an interest-free loan, and she can still spend that money, she can still sell the house, she can downsize, she can do exactly the same as she would have done had she had that money left direct to her. But what we've done is we've immediately ring-fenced certain assets. So if she does marry Juan and then get divorced, or remarry and then die, we've at least ring-fenced some of those assets to make sure they go down to Fiona and Bronwyn. If Carol ends up in a care home, we've at least possibly ring-fenced some of the value of the property to make sure that that can go down to Fiona Bronwyn, even if the rest of the estate needs to be spent on care fees. And what we've also done is we've kept certain assets out of her estate for inheritance tax purposes. Things like her pension or my pension, things like the life insurance, and also with regards to the business shares, we've solved the problem of if she sells the business and turns my business from an asset that's free of inheritance tax into one that is inheritance taxable. So Carol takes all of that money out of the trust. On Carol's death, it returns to the trust, and then she leaves everything else that she owns, all investments, the rest of the property, everything else, to the trust framework. What that means is that the trustees can then make sure that Fiona Bronwyn don't get access to that money until they're old enough and responsible enough. They've got the flexibility to say, do you know what? One of them is really older, mature, and yeah, we're going to give her some capital so that she can buy a house. The other one, I'm not so sure about that one. I think we better just give her some income for the time being, because actually capital, it could be a real problem with her. It also means when they're old enough and responsible enough, they can draw the money out of the trust, but as an interest-free loan in the same way that Carol did during her lifetime, which means if they marry the son-in-law from hell, we've protected that money from it disappearing off in divorce settlements. It's not 100% guaranteed to protect it, but it's one of the best forms of protection you can use with regards to avoiding the son-in-law from hell walking off with the money. And then finally, when they want to leave that money to their children, what they can do is they can return the loan back to the trust, and the grandchildren can take the money out of the trust again as a loan, which means that we can potentially skip inheritance tax for a generation. So between Carol and I and our children will save some inheritance tax on things like life insurance and pensions, but between us and our grandchildren, we've got the opportunity to save a huge amount of inheritance tax. So the trust framework is just such a fabulous way of protecting your assets, to make sure they go down through the bloodline, make sure the people you actually want to inherit your money really do, and in the most tax efficient and protected way possible. Now, of course, there's lots of different ways that you can create a legacy. One example that I talk about in my book is the grandparent interviews. So we've interviewed my parents and my parents-in-law, a list of 15 questions, I think it was. They're actually in the book, The Dream Retirement, the questions that we asked. Because wouldn't it be amazing if you could watch a video today of your great-grandparents just telling you what life was like when they were growing up, and what principles their parents bestowed on them, and what they did for their job, and what they did at school? Wouldn't it be brilliant to be able to watch that video back over the last few generations of your family? Well, today we have the technology that allows us to do that, but very few people ever do it. So there are so many amazing ways that you can create a legacy, and they're not just about the finances. And I encourage you to think about how you're going to create that legacy for your loved ones. Now, there's a guy called George Carlin who decided to do it in a slightly different way, because he said that when I come back, I want to live life in reverse. So I'm going to die to start with, because I want to get that out of the way. And then I'm going to sit in a care home sucking sweets at the start, but when I'm fit enough and active enough, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to do retirement. And I'm going to tick off the bucket list, I'm going to go do my travelling, and do all of those amazing things pretty close to the start of my life. Then once I've got bored of that, I'm going to go to work. And on my first day of work, they're going to give me a gold watch. And I'm going to go through work, and by the time that I've got bored of work and I'm young enough and promiscuous enough, I'm going to go out into my student life and my teenage years and have a whale of a time. And then at the end of my life, I'm going to spend the last 9 months in spa-like conditions with room service on tap, floating, happy and free. And then, of course, it's all going to end with an orgasm. So whatever way you choose to leave a legacy, make sure you leave a legacy that's worth sharing, because it can be so much more valuable than just the money.